Islands. And this is the first map upon which America is given its name, America, by Martin Waldseemüller. And it might have been named Columbia, but Waldseemüller didn't think much of Columbus. And as far as he knew, Amerigo Vespucci was the discoverer of America. And you see Amerigo portrayed over here, a little map that, oddly enough, at this time, Europeans have landed along the coasts here. Balboa has not even had his sighting of the Pacific yet, and yet we have this curious configuration of South America, which is almost accurate. It's kind of deflated right here, but it's kind of a strange, almost a foreshadowing or an intuition of what is to come. Here it is kind of flattened out, distended. And now we see the mandalic structure is just totally disintegrating as the earth flattens out, and the horizontal spirit begins to come in. It's interesting, Rob Hand wrote an interesting paper, I don't know if anybody's read it, about the shift in the precession of the equinoxes. He actually picked this up from Young, from the vertical fish of Pisces to the horizontal fish. Pisces begins to come in right around the year 0, thereabouts, but the first of the two fishes is vertical. And he says, he picks this up from Young. Young actually developed the argument. And he says, this is consistent with the vertical orientation of the great culture worlds of the Arabs and Christians and the Byzantines, their sense of depth, of admitting the world spirit, the pneuma, to come pouring down into the soul, boring holes into the eyes, that inwardness, this kind of vertical relationship between man and God, and that spiritual depth that began to come in at that time, as the precession was shifting into the vertical fish. But as the centuries go along, the precession begins to move to the horizontal fish, and Rob Hand points out right about, depending on where you want to date this, and the dates get extremely ambiguous, but the movement from a vertical orientation to a horizontal orientation is not ambiguous. The Arabs sort of start this horizontality by going out and conquering the entire world that had been occupied by the Romans. So they go out and sort of inseminate the world with the Mohammedan. They go into India and into Africa and into Spain, where they are repelled and pushed back. The Jews already have a very good hold in Spain, and they're pushed back by the Battle of Toledo. And about this time, the further you go upward in time and westward in space, as the spirit moves from the Near East to riverine civilizations, to the Mediterranean civilization, to the Atlantic civilization out of which we have come, there's a movement also in general horizontality in the imagination. And this is part of what may be behind these voyages. They go around and the world becomes more and more horizontal as more is known about it, and these voyagers sail past the horizons. And at about the same time they're doing this, perspective is invented. That's a curious thing. Right about the turn of the 15th century, you begin to get depth perspective, which is invented 1406, something like that. And you get this new, if you look at the Renaissance canvases, look at the evolution of painting from the medieval period to the Renaissance period, and you get these vertical canvases that slowly give way, when depth perspective comes in, to these huge horizontal canvases that accurately record the sense of the thrusting of the soul outward horizontally into space. At the same time that the mandalic image of the world is flattening out and becoming horizontal, at the same time that the precession is moving through the horizontal fish and the Platonic month of Pisces. It's a great essay by Rob Hand. Really enjoyed it. So there has been this horizontal movement, and Eric Neumann writes of it in terms of a shifting from the heaven archetype, the vertical orientation, to the earthly archetype. And correspondingly, not only do you get depth perspective, and the moment of the invention of the sort of horizontal feeling for the world can actually be dated to Petrarch's ascent of Mount Ventoux, which is something like the middle of the 14th century. It's about 50 or 60 years before the invention of depth perspective. And we take the ascent of mountains for granted. Simply climbing a mountain to get the great, I mean, this is a horizontal city, everything about it is horizontal, and we sort of take that for granted. But prior to Petrarch's ascent of Mount Ventoux, he sort of climbs this mountain just to climb it, gets up there, and he's got a copy of Augustine with him, and he's reading passages in Augustine about how one should not climb mountains, one should go inward into the soul, and suddenly he has this sublime experience of this horizontal expansion of space. And he writes this frantic letter back to one of his relatives describing this new experience of space as this soulful horizontality that hitherto for some reason, never occurred to anybody to meditate upon. So we get the whole sort of Western method of climbing mountains for the sake of getting these sublime horizontal perspectives, beginning with Petrarch's ascent of Mount Ventoux, and then we move into these horizontal voyages and then the discovery of depth perspective. And as the Earth archetype begins to shift the heavenly vertical archetype out, you get a new kind of, in the Renaissance, in the development of Renaissance art, you get this new kind of love for specific things, concrete things, physical, material things. It becomes very important to Leonardo, and it was really his painting of the Annunciation, where the angel comes down and announces to Mary that she will incarnate the Word. If you look at the wings of Gabriel, he's copied them from a sparrow. He's actually concerned that the wings should look realistic. I mean, that's an absurdity. But the Earth archetype is coming in now. All wings up to that point were just, they weren't modeled after birds or anything. And then you get this new sense of horizontality in Leonardo's paintings, too. He becomes concerned not only with perspective, but with what the effect of light would be on the dim blue distances and horizons. And he's very careful to work out this formula about having these sort of blue, misty mountains in the background. And you get the Mona Lisa, and she's sitting there, and the whole key to the painting is not her. It's the fact that back behind her, there's this massive horizontal space with these tiny little mountains in the distance. That's the Western, Northern European, Faustian experience of infinite space that is being articulated there by Leonardo. And he's also concerned with getting the folds and the way the robe falls on the angel's body exactly realistically. He does all these intense sketches because he wants it to be realistic. And so from Leonardo on, there's a new intensity for realism as the Earth archetype begins to obsess the Northern European imagination, and the art becomes more and more realistic until biblical themes drop out altogether, and you get the landscape painting. By the 19th century, all they're painting are, breakfast on the grass, very mundane, realistic things. So we have had this kind of interest in horizontality, which Campbell is framing in terms of destroying the mandalas with this new Promethean, titanic spirit of doing what no one else has ever done before. And as a result of that, we have gone to the moon. We may go to Mars. And it's just one innovation after the next. So that's Waldseemüller's map, and I just have a final map I threw in for fun because this is Rosselli's map of 1508, and here's the world really as we know it. I mean, it's all mapped out, longitude, latitude, very scientifically accurate. Although America is it's truncated here for some reason. You get this odd thing here, Antarctica. Antarctica was not discovered until the turn of the 19th century. But here we have Antarctica geographically where it should be. It's not large enough, but it's also, the shape is exactly right. This little spike sticking out if you look at Antarctica, and nobody can figure out how this got there. And there's a man whose work I haven't read yet that I'm looking forward to, Charles Hapgood, who devotes a whole book to this called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, where he develops this thesis that the existence of Antarctica was not only known about by earlier cultures, but that there's evidence for advanced maritime civilizations having flourished prior to the last ice age, from which the whole Atlantis myth may have emerged as a result of, he develops this incredible theory about the entire crust of the Earth shifting, and that explains why, when you look at a number of these medieval maps, you find Antarctica represented, but it's sort of in different places, and he thinks this may be a dim echo of a tradition of peoples who lived on Antarctica, but fled from there when there was a massive Earth crust displacement about 10,000 BC, right as the last ice age is beginning to melt, and these peoples then go off in Hapgood's thesis, and they found the agricultural centers, which then come in on the heels of the last ice age, right about 10,000 BC. And there may be simply nothing to that thesis other than pure speculation, but it's a fun one. And we do have this problem of Antarctica being represented on Renaissance maps when nobody theoretically knew of its existence until the 19th century. Well, that's about as far as I wanted to bring us tonight, and I wanted you to get the sense of Campbell's representation of the Western spirit as this Promethean endeavor to destroy the great mandalas of the world's traditions. And then he says, he noticed, Jung made the comment that he noticed in the writings, in the mandala drawings of most of his patients, that in the centers of these mandalas would be either representations of human beings or images of artifacts such as stars or